This is Pastor M.D. Lewis, the speaker for the Bible Interpreter Tapes. Our lecture study today is Satan's Impersonation. We turn to the book of Revelation, the 12th chapter. I'm reading verse 12. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea. For the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knows he hath but a short time. Now this is the observation of the prophet John after he has dealt with the great dragon of representing pagan Rome, and he recognizes that the dragon is Satan, which is verse 9. That great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. Now you see in that text he states that Satan is going to deceive the entire world. It's rather difficult for us to comprehend the vastness of deception that particular verse entails. The whole world will be brought under Satan's deception. Now it says he comes down and works with great fervor because he knows he has but a short time. Now this short time is equivalent to the time of the great world power that is depicted in the 17th chapter of the book of Revelation. Now you remember this particular dragon also has 7 heads and 10 horns, and the prophet explained the 7 heads. I'm reading now Revelation 17 verse 10. And there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he is come, he must continue a short space. Now these 5 heads of this dragon that are fallen are Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, the pagan empire, and Rome, the papal empire. So that brings us down to a time somewhere along the end of the 1260-year period, which would be 1798. At that time, he says, there is one that is, and that's the United States at that time, and one is yet to come. Now, the one yet to come is the great world political power of church and state, which is depicted here in the Revelation, the 17th chapter. Now, the point I want you to note here, it says that when this last head comes into existence, which is this world power that's brought under the deception of Satan, which is church and state, he says it will continue a short space. Now, isn't it rather a marvel that when Satan comes into the world power of church and state, as recorded in Revelation 12:12 that I just read, he comes down with great wrath because he knows he has a short time. So the short time that he knows he has is the short time that's designated to this great world power of church and state. Now, notice in the 16th chapter of the book of Revelation, when speaking about the 7 last plagues, and in connection with the 6th plague, I read Revelation 16, verse 12. And the 6th angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up. Now, you remember the great river Euphrates is symbolic of the world system of Babylon, which is described in Revelation, the 17th chapter. So when he pours his water on the Euphrates, he's pouring his water on this great world political system of church and state. That is, he's pouring out his vial upon the water of the Euphrates, which represents this great kingdom. For you remember, it says the waters are nations, kindreds, tongue, and people, and that is this world organization in the last days. Now it says, and I saw 3 unclean spirits, like frogs, come out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet. For they are the spirits of devils working miracles, which go forth to the kings of the earth and of the whole world to gather them. So here again you see the picture is that these 3 religious powers, the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet, are in connection with the kings of the earth, which are now on a world-organized basis, and the spirit of devil is drawing these into this great world organization. So when Satan comes impersonating Christ, there is a very definite political and religious sequence that is significant for us to see how this develops in the last days. It is a world political power, a world religious power, and Satan is bringing this together to combat God's saints and those who keep the commandments. Now, let's turn to the book of Corinthians, the second book of Corinthians, the 11th chapter, and notice the Apostle Paul's statement concerning this power of deception in the last days. This is 2 Corinthians, the 11th chapter, and I'm commencing to read with verse 13. For such are false apostles. Now you recall that one of the religious organizations that we read in Revelation, the 16th chapter, verse 13 and 14, it says it was the false prophet in connection with the beast and the dragon. Now here it says, for such are false apostles. Now obviously these false apostles are in the great organization of the false prophets. These false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ. Now, that is a strange text. These false apostles, deceitful workers, are transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ. That is, these persons who are controlled by Satan and are doing his work are giving the appearance that they are the apostles of Christ. And then the next verse says, and do not marvel, and no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. Therefore it's no great thing if his ministers also be transformed as ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works. Now this is a very significant text, and it is very helpful to us and very pertinent to us, because when the disciples asked Christ concerning the end of the world, as recorded in the 24th chapter of the book of Matthew, you remember they said to him, tell us what shall be these things, and what shall be the signs of thy coming and the end of the world. Now that's verse 3 of the 24th chapter. So the disciples put a very pointed, pertinent question to Christ. What will be the sign of thy coming and the end of the world? The very first thing that Jesus said, as recorded in the next verse, take heed that no man deceive you. So you can see that he has in mind at the end of time the great deception that shall take place when these ministers of Satan will appear as ministers of righteousness. And I'm sure that many of them will be declaring certain aspects of righteousness by faith and will promote certain doctrines that are not in accordance with the great truths which our church has taught. So don't be deceived if these persons come as ministers of righteousness, as apostles of Christ, as he said, but they will deceive. Now notice verse 5 of the 24th chapter of Matthew, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. So Christ is very emphatic to relate to us that there is going to be great deception in the last days. And we need to be aware of this and be sure that our doctrines are well founded in the revealed word of the Bible and the spirit of prophecy. In the book of Isaiah, the 37th chapter, these aspects of deception are not only spoken in the New Testament, but they are prophesied also in the Old Testament. Notice in the book of Isaiah, the 37th chapter and verse 16, O Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, that dwellest between the cherubim, thou art God, even thou alone of all the kingdoms of the earth, thou hast made heaven and earth. Now you recall, and I have stated over and over in these lecture studies, that the last day events all take their significance out of the most holy place of the heavenly sanctuary. And this particular subject of impersonation of Satan is no exception. Now, this text that I just read says that God dwells between the cherubims in the heavenly sanctuary. That is symbolized above the ark, and the Shekinah, where the actual presence of deity came into the sanctuary structures on earth. And God is pictured as sitting between the angels above the ark, which entailed the Ten Commandments, which represents the foundation of God's throne. And that's a suitable place for God to be seated. Now, you remember in the book of Exodus, the 20th chapter, verse 3, in delineating the Ten Commandments, it says, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." Of course, we understand the truthfulness of this. There is only one God, and we should worship him, and the first commandment declares that. So if the individuals who believe in Christ and God for their salvation and observe and give honor and reverence to the Ten Commandments, they will have a fidelity to God that nothing in this world will deter them or cause them to turn away. And Satan knows this. And he knows that if he's going to impersonate Satan, he's got to do something to disarrange or suggest an addition or a change to the commandments of God, which is the foundation of his throne. If he's ever going to impersonate Christ and get the people to worship him as Christ, he's going to have to set aside at least the first commandment of the Ten Commandments, in which the persons are dedicated and devoted to God entirely and completely. Now, Satan knows that. And it says that he will transform himself into an angel of light, and his ministers as ministers of righteousness, and his apostles as the apostles of Christ. So you see, he is endeavoring to establish a distinctive likeness of the things of God, because he has a particular purpose in mind that is expressed in the 14th chapter of the book of Isaiah, the 12th chapter of the book of Isaiah, in which it is stated that Satan endeavors to set himself up as God on the earth. This is the 14th chapter of the book of Isaiah, verse 12. "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend unto heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north, and I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, and I will be like the Most High." Now, you understand, God is seated in the most holy place, as symbolized above the law and the ark. Now, Satan is endeavoring to claim that position for himself. You remember in the book of Thessalonians, it says that he will sit in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. So the picture in the last days is God seated upon the throne in the holiest place, and Christ as the high priest ministering to us the last phases of heaven's ministry to cleanse the soul of guilt. And God knows that Satan is endeavoring to take his place or to impersonate his work and his position and to set himself upon the throne. Now, this particular position of Satan and his act in accomplishing this, he is endeavoring to do so by his purpose of setting aside the law of God. As I've said, if God's throne is established upon that law, if he's to take over that throne, he must make some correction in that law. Now, we've been studying the three angels' messages in relationship to the institution of Sunday as the Sabbath to be worshipped. And Satan knows that if he can get the people to accept his day in place of the law of God, then they'll be worshiping him in the place of God. Now, the Bible and the Spirit of Prophecy has warned us against such a means. In Great Controversy, page 534, it says, "When the standard of righteousness is set aside, the way is open for the prince of evil to establish his power on the earth." Now, Satan knows where to strike, and he's going to strike at the law of God. And it says in the Ministry of Healing, page 92, "All who willfully depart from God's commandments are placing themselves under the control of Satan." Now, I hope that you see by these particular statements and this subject we're now treating why God sent those three angels in the last of time, with the warnings of the fall of Babylon, which is the first Sunday law, and the mark of the beast, which entails the second Sunday law, that none shall be able to buy or sell, that they are endeavoring to set aside the law of God, set in an institution that Satan has inaugurated, and in accepting Sunday, they are accepting the author of Sunday, which is Satan. Now, he knows that, and he knows how to divert and make it appear that he is an angel of light, and his ministers are ministers of righteousness in teaching a commandment that is not found in the law of God. Now, this statement in Ministry of Healing goes on to say, many a man tampers with evil, thinking that he can break away at pleasure. But he is lured on and on until he finds himself controlled by a will stronger than his own. He cannot escape its mysterious power. Now, Satan knows how that's going to work, and by setting the law aside, that is one factor of it, and getting the people to accept it, he knows they will be accepting him, and he will lure them on and unite them into a world organization of which they will not be able to free themselves. Now, you recall in the book of Daniel, this was specifically stated that this would occur in the last days, for it says in Daniel 7:25 that he shall speak great words, that is, this satanic power and the beast that represents Satan's work on the earth. He shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, think to change times and laws. And these shall be given unto his hand until a time and times and a dividing of time, which of course is the 1260-year period, of which we were describing in a previous study of the beast of Revelation, the 13th chapter. And we noticed there that's exactly what he did. You remember we spoke about the lion's mouth, and that the word for mouth is commandment, and when he opens his mouth, he will not hesitate to attack the law of God. So here it is prophesied that this evil power would make an attack upon the law of God, and Satan knows where to strike to divert the people to his power and control. So it was stated explicitly that this would occur in the last days, that Satan would endeavor to change the law and thus inaugurate himself into a position of control. Now, on the chart which we are using in connection with these studies, on the third chart in paragraph 6, it says, fallen angels upon the earth form confederation with evil men. In this age, the Antichrist will appear as the true Christ, and then the law of God will be fully made void in the nations of our world. Now, with this chart that we have, I want you to notice in the arrangement of it, and this is very important for the individual, to be able to establish the time element of these particular events that take place. Now, you remember we emphasized that when Satan comes, he will make a decree that none shall be able to buy or sell, and this will take place at the second Sunday law, which comes in connection with the third angel's message concerning the mark. So when Satan makes his impersonation and comes purporting to be Christ, he will lead the world into the establishment of the second Sunday law, which has to do with buying or selling. And remember, it is a worldwide organization. So when he sees the people in America make a Sunday law, that is the starting of the spirits of devils working in the church. And then they continue until they bring in a world church and a world political state, and then he endeavors to bring in the second Sunday law, compelling the people that they will not be able to buy or sell, say they have the mark, which is the third angel's message. So you see how these things are brought together in a very coordinated way. So you must associate the impersonation of Satan in connection with the third angel's message and the second Sunday law, which is the worldwide decree that none shall be able to buy or sell. So Satan now is moving forward in a very effective way in bringing about his world kingdom. So that's exactly what it says here, that when he comes, then the law of God will be made void in the nations of our world, indicating it's a worldwide organization. Now, going on in this particular statement in volume, in the Testimonies to Ministers, page 62, it says, rebellion against God's holy law will be fully ripe. But the true leader of all this rebellion is Satan, clothed as an angel of light. Now you remember that's exactly what Paul said in 2 Corinthians 11th chapter verse 14. Satan will impose himself as an angel of light. And it goes on to say in the statement of the Spirit of Prophecy, men will be deceived and will exalt him to the place of God and deify him. Now you recall from the verses that I have just read that Satan has set up himself out to change the law, get the people to accept the change, and establish his authority as the authority of God to be worshipped as God. So his purpose from the very beginning was to dethrone God and put himself in that place. And that deception has been increasing over the history of the ages and will finally reach its culmination in the last days. And we must see how his program is increasing, and that the three angels are sent from God to warn the world against the establishment of his throne. Now in Testimonies to Ministers, in volume 6, it says in page 14 that Satan is working to the utmost to make himself as God and to destroy all who oppose his power. Now, this institutes a very distinctive factor here, and a person will not be able to understand the last day events most clearly until he understands very pointedly the means and who brings about the destruction of the wicked. Now, this particular text says here that Satan will set himself up as God and will destroy all who oppose his power. Now, right away, a person will find a distinctive difference between God setting himself up in his power, that he will not destroy the wicked. The wicked are destroyed by their own sins, as we shall see as we develop these studies in the last days. Now, this is one of the deceptions that Satan is going to institute and accuse God of destroying persons, which God does not do. In fact, his whole program is to save them, and Calvary, of course, is the greatest exhibition. Instead of endeavoring to destroy the wicked, God is to take their sins and die that he might save them. And in Desire of Ages it says that Satan never uses God's technique, and God never uses Satan's technique. So we must get these points clearly in our mind, or we'll be swept into the deception of the last days. Now, notice this statement from Great Controversy 593. It says, at the revival of God's work, the prince of evil is aroused to a more intense activity. So as the three angels bring about the promulgation of the gospel and the judgment and the great truths of the Scripture, Satan will stimulate a false revival and great activity among his adherents, and make it appear that there's a great revival going on, as this says. He's now putting forth his utmost effort for a final struggle against Christ and his followers. The last great delusions is soon to open before us. Antichrist is to perform his marvelous works in our sight. So closely will the counterfeit resemble the true that it will be impossible to distinguish between them except by the Holy Scriptures. So if a person is going to resort to his sight, or to hearing, or to the observation of miracles, or the hearing of certain doctrines which may, the false apostles of Christ and the apostles of Satan may in some instances proclaim the truths of the Bible, and then attach to it the false interpretations. So a person is not very, very clever and very attentive, he will be swept away. As much as to say, if a person resorts to his physical senses, he will be deceived. The Bible is the only way that a person will be able to detect the differences. In Prophets and Kings, page 184, it says, I will place in its stead, this is Satan speaking, and the prophet is recording Satan's thoughts. I will place in its stead a day that does not bear the credentials of God. That is talking about the law and the Sabbath. He said, I will put something in its place. A day that cannot be a sign between God and his people. I will lead those who accept this day to place upon it the sanctity that God placed upon the seventh day. Through my vicegerent, which is the Pope of Rome, I will exalt myself. The first day will be extolled, and the Protestant world will receive this spurious Sabbath as genuine. Now you see, this is the way that Satan is working to bring about the deception in the last days. Now, you remember the text in the book of Thessalonians, the second book of Thessalonians, in which the verse is very clearly stated of what Satan's intentions are. I'm reading now 2 Thessalonians, the second chapter. I'm commencing to read verse 3. Let no man deceive you by any means. Well, now you see here Paul is stating the same thing that Christ did when the disciples asked him about the end of the world. Let no man deceive you, for that day will not come except the coming of falling away first, and the man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth him and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or is worshipped, so that he, as God, sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Now you see, as God is endeavoring to establish himself in the heavenly sanctuary, in the most holy place, in the process of the judgment, Satan is endeavoring to take that place and deceive the people in the last days. Now, it is very important for us that we understand the principles of truth. Because remember, Christ said, as recorded in the book of John, the 12th chapter, he said, now is the prince of this world cast out. And as I want to reiterate again, the judgment in the most holy place is making the final casting out of the sins of the people and establishing their characters in line with the Ten Commandments and the character of God. So while the work in the most holy place and finally comes down to the living will be casting Satan completely out of the saints, the wicked are being under the control of Satan. So it's very important for us to understand this impersonation, that when that time comes, we will be fully in line with God's law and the life of Christ in the way that we live.